Hi, welcome back. This is Dr. Burton, and we've been going over a tutorial of philosophical foundation, a critical analysis of basic beliefs, and I am super excited to share with you that we have Public Philosophy Press has just published History of Philosophy, a critical analysis of unresolved disputes by Dr. Surrendra Gangdean. It is a companion volume to Philosophical Foundation, so now you can read them together. This book was something he wanted to add to PF, so you can see it would have been a very large book if he did that. I suggested to him that it should be its own volume, and at that time, we only had a fourth of the book, and it was the part 4 on the history of philosophy, a summary and critique. This summer, we spent time going through Dr. Gangdean's boxes and boxes of handwritten notes, and I found the handwritten notes from his sabbatical year, 1997-1998. I was his research assistant during that time, and we found that he had written another section, and it goes over epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. And it is almost a precursor to PF. So it is some of the same topics expressed differently. So I want you to read them together because you'll see that there are some things stated in this book more completely than they are in Philosophical Foundation. And there are some things more completely stated in Philosophical Foundations than here. But what is not in PF is the history of philosophy part. So I kind of wanted to read to you the editor's preface, which I wrote. I was the general editor of the book, putting it together for you. I just wanted to read the editor's preface so you can get a sense of what the book is about and what it covers, and how it's a unique contribution to the field of philosophy. Dr. Surrendra Gangdean, 1943 to 2022, professor, pastor, husband, father, mentor, friend, and builder, was a giant in the faith and a philosopher among philosophers. He spent a lifetime refining the foundation for philosophy and theology and historic Christianity. By recognizing the foundation, he was able to name the errors in the history of ideas due to the failure to have laid and built upon that sure foundation. He was always talking about the foundation. He taught in the college classroom for 45 years, the seminary for 25 years, and from the pulpit for almost 30 years. He taught introduction to philosophy, logic, ethics, philosophy of religion, Eastern religions, world religions, introduction to humanities, introduction to Christianity, philosophy of art, great books, philosophical theology, biblical worldview, biblical history, church history, systematic theology, biblical hermeneutics, and existential hermeneutics. So I list these to show you the breadth of his studying and teaching. In each of his encounters with notable thinkers and with his students, Dr. Gangdean heard, understood, and took intellectual challenges seriously. There was no known basic challenge that he did not work through, first for himself, then with others in much discussion, and then in his teaching and writing. He was tenacious in going after a basic dispute or challenge, finding the assumptions underlying the challenge, and then attempting a response and resolution to the problem. This is what he was good at, right? Give him a challenge with a basic belief, and he'll go after it. History of Philosophy, a critical analysis of unresolved disputes, is an example of Dr. Gangdean's incisive analysis of philosophical problems, which are rooted in unexamined assumptions, showing how he worked tenaciously to address those assumptions. He always begins with the assumption that some things are clear, the basic things are clear, the basic things about God and man and good and evil are clear to reason, what he called the principle of clarity. Because the basic things are clear, knowledge is possible versus skepticism and fideism. His assurance that knowledge is possible is what drives him to seek to address challenges which, when unresolved, result in skepticism. And skepticism, left to foment, leads to nihilism or meaninglessness. Dr. Gangdean keenly saw that the truth distorted leads to division, unresolved disputes, apostasy, decay, and cultural collapse, which may be where we're at now, right? Dr. Gangdean brings the history of philosophy into sharp focus in the conclusion of HP, as he shows that he is not merely interested in resolving disputes, but that the history of philosophy is part of a larger, ongoing spiritual war between belief and unbelief, which is currently coming to expression through the conflict between anti-theistic, atheistic cultural Marxism and theism. Either false assumptions will be exposed and overcome by reason, and a deeper foundation for philosophy laid, or reason will be rejected, and emotion and power will be used to further push an anti-theist, atheist agenda in a new global context. Seriously addressing faulty philosophical assumptions then becomes a matter of individual, cultural, and civilizational life and death. This is not just another history of philosophy text. HP is a blueprint for how to face the philosophical challenges of the past and present wisely and courageously. Dr. Gangdean shows us the full range of basic assumptions, which are not many. He shows us how to use reason critically to analyze basic assumptions and test them for meaning, that if an assumption violates a law of thought, it cannot be thought, and is therefore meaningless and cannot be true. In HP, part of Dr. Gangdean's groundbreaking work includes overcoming skepticism and fideism, showing that material monism, spiritual monism, and dualism are contradictory belief systems when examined critically by the use of reason, and showing that there is a moral law that is clear because it is based on human nature, comprehensive because it includes all of our choices and actions, and critical because it is a matter of life and death. In addition, Dr. Gangdean uses the principle of clarity to show where other philosophers fail to provide a foundation for philosophy, and with that, culture and civilization, because they either deny that knowledge of basic things is possible, fail to see and build upon the basic things, or fail to recognize the good for human nature. Future generations will consider this small book a giant step forward in laying the foundation for philosophy on solid bedrock. It is truly a gem, an intellectual work of enduring value. For the past few years, Dr. Gangdean had been working on the second edition of his first and more complete publication, Philosophical Foundation, A Critical Analysis of Basic Beliefs. He thought that he could merely add the History of Philosophy section from his 1997-98 sabbatical writing as an additional chapter to PF. As he and I went over the sabbatical material, we quickly realized that it was enough to justify a second book. I had the privilege of being Dr. Gangdean's research assistant during that sabbatical and was very familiar with the work he did during that time, not just in his writing, but in what he was teaching in the classroom and outside the classroom. After his passing in February of 2022, Dr. Gangdean left me as curator of all his books and papers. Some of his former students and congregants and I spent the summer combing through the 45 years worth of mostly handwritten and audio recorded material. We found a box with his handwritten notes from the 1997-98 sabbatical year. What I did not realize was that I was only familiar with the fourth part of HP on the history of philosophy, and that there were 3 prior parts on epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. In many ways, those 3 parts were an early formulation of Philosophical Foundation. Thus, I highly recommend that you read HP and PF together as companion works. Dr. Gangdean had a very clear outline for HP that he had intended to write in 1997 and 98 during his sabbatical, and he had a year's worth of handwritten notes that filled in most of his outline, but there were missing pieces. In editing HP, I had to look into other areas of Dr. Gangdean's work to fill in those gaps. The first source I used was his college classroom handouts and recorded lectures from the same time period. The second source was Philosophical Foundation. And the third source was his handwritten notes from other contexts. The introduction and first part of the book were almost totally complete. There was one section on reason and its use and a section on reason in us that is quoted from PF. He had written a whole bunch on reason, and then those two parts were just missing. So I had to pull from his other work. I had to pull from his classroom handouts and lectures for almost all of parts 2 and 3. I think he thought, I have it up here, I'll just write it down one day. And he never wrote it down, but it was in his course material. All of part 4 was complete except for the chapter on Aristotle, which we couldn't find. So we had to take the material on Aristotle from a lecture given at Logos Theological Seminary and edited by the Logos Foundation editorial board. And the final chapter on critical theory was also, its new material was not here. In 1997-98, we were hardly considering critical theory. But in the summer of 2020, it became the dominant philosophy of the day. Dr. Gangdean had approximately 10 handwritten pages, notes that served as a summary and analysis of critical theory and white privilege, only they were not formally ordered thoughts. I found these handwritten notes, and it was just like he had for a few days been thinking about it and writing it down, almost like a meditation. So these were almost a written meditation upon the most pressing challenges of our day. One of the most difficult tasks of my career thus far was to take those thoughts and craft a chapter that followed his previous method of summary and critique. What I think you will see in the final chapter is Dr. Gangdean's mature thinking on the history of philosophy, how we ended up where we are today philosophically, and the dire need to take thoughts captive and lay a sure foundation for culture. He really pulls it all together in that last chapter, and you start to see that philosophy is really important and it's been done badly for too long. In addition to my editorial work, there are many others who have helped in the editing and publishing process. This really was a team effort. Particularly helpful was the Logos Foundation editorial board, which Dr. Gangdean set in place prior to his passing. He had asked us all to be on a team and to help with publishing his works. We are learning the value of coordinating and cooperating for the good. That's something he always wanted us to do, coordinate and cooperate. Hopefully, we will soon be humming at high speed. I challenge you to read History of Philosophy, a critical analysis of unresolved disputes, with an attitude of seeking, integrity, and the hope that there are answers to the unresolved disputes that we have inherited from the failure to address basic questions through the critical use of reason. So the book is very hopeful insofar as you get to see what the logical options are out there and how they aren't difficult to address. If we're using reason critically at the basic level, we can settle disputes. And this book settles most of them in philosophy. And if you think I'm overstating it, read the book and let me know where I've overstated it. All right, so I invite you to join me in reading both of these books, Philosophical Foundation and the History of Philosophy. I'm going to finish the tutorial series on PF before I do HP, but it is coming, and now you have a taste of what the book is about. You can read ahead of time and then anticipate the tutorials and read with me, or you can just buy it and read it on your own. You don't need me. But yes, please do buy the book. I will put the link down below. Thanks again for supporting my channel. Thanks again for your love of philosophy and love of learning. Continue with that passion, and Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in the next video.